Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a leading marketing and branding professional from Kingston, Jamaica, Mr. Phillip J. Clayton, or PJ. PJ, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
PJ is a brand consultant, a strategic advisor, and a brand and marketing design judge. He's a member of the PAC Global Leadership Awards International Judging Commission. So, PJ, before we talk branding and brand design, tell me about your own journey in brief and what inspired you to become a brand consultant.
It was I'm sure you're familiar with the phrasing that passion finds you, you don't find passion, right?
Mm.
I studied fine art and I grew up in design. My father worked in advertising, and I realized that I like solving problems. So design kind of became my purpose. Somewhere along the lines, I saw these things everywhere, everyone does, logos. And
Mm.
I'm all like, what are these things? What are they called? And then I started to understand the symbolism behind them.
Mm.
And I discovered this whole world of brand, which for me was mostly, products, fashion, and I said, I want to be part of that. I want to learn how to do that. And somewhere along the lines of my jobs, in my advertising jobs and printing, worked in different industries, PepsiCo would be my career defining moment.
Mhm.
I helped to rebrand the Peter Arnold PepsiCo identity in Jamaica.
Mhm.
And when I did that, I was so fascinated with this process and symbology and things being representing things larger than themselves. And I just went on that path. This is a short story version. Went on that path and I never left it. And I
Nice.
just kept at it, and I became known as a brand consultant, brand expert. People call me all these things,
Yep.
and I embodied it.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So let's talk branding for the next 10 or 12 minutes, and then we'll talk brand design director. So, PJ, my first question is, what are some of the key elements that define a strong brand in today's market?
Uh, Interestingly, the original fundamentals still matter, which is good business and products, management and value, and the brand gets its value from that. So a strong brand in today's market would be an extension of that in regards to extended experiences, consumer engagement. The brand forms for me, the brand forms when the experience ends. So we're in an age of technology where we're going to be forming different relationships with people and how they interact.
Mm.
So the business side of it is always has to be these four things, I would say: awareness, knowledge, commitment, and
Mm.
supply chain management. If you master those things, then the brand benefits from it, because the brand is a figment. It's not real. It's not tangible.
Yeah.
You have tangible experiences of that. So the business and your product development has to be quality, high quality, to have a strong brand.
Mm.
I guess I call it a salient brand, but these are all words.
Correct.
Yeah, but that's what I'd say. A strong brand today would be embracing technology and leveraging it for the experience.
Well said. Well said. And what, in your view, are some of the common mistakes a lot of companies make, especially startups, when they start building their brand?
The first thing they get wrong is believing that they have a brand
Mm.
that early in the game, and they attempt to build it. It's a startup. My advice, or where they fail, is always where they start to focus on branding
Mm.
and establish themselves as a brand, and lose sight of that business and management we just spoke about. Developing the business properly, the brand starts to form through consumer association and experiences. The consumers start to think, and it's embedded in their mind. So right, then people would stop saying Ashtosh Supermarket and say Ashtosh. No, Ashtosh is a brand.
Mm.
So they've dropped off the business completely.
Mm.
They say they're going to buy bread by Ashtosh. because everybody knows where that is and who that is. That's where they fail. They should focus on business and product development and allow the brand to form itself like a good parent with a child, guiding it, but allowing it to form. When it's defined itself, then you can now start doing the what I call functional assets, branding and your logos and all that.
Sure, sure. And you spoke about digital a few minutes back. Given today's uh, technology and AI, and so much happening in the world of branding because of inputs from technology, what, in your view, has been the impact of digital transformation on branding?
It's been very disruptive on one side of it. Um, and on the other side of it, it has offered a lot of opportunities to be leveraged. In packaging design, for example, where I consider those things vehicles that deliver the brand message and experience. We have what we call extended packs. This is where you buy the product. When you leave the shelf or the store, what happens after that? So technology, digital transformation has now introduced this new way of keeping the consumer engaged by buying this product when they're at home through different codes and apps, and they can interact with the company's philosophies and manifestos and history. I think Weetabix did that, where they told stories of the farmers that they could buy wheat from to make their products, which is like I think 30 kilometer. It's an area around the factory, right? And they still buy from those farmers today. So the digital transformation allowed an old company to now be part of a contemporary market environment, where they can still be Weetabix, but now they're in technology where they can tell stories, right? Storytelling and all this stuff. It allows for an emotional bond with the consumer.
Mm-hmm. The other aspect that I thought I would get your perspective on is storytelling. Everyone has now become a storyteller in the world, and everyone says, how important storytelling is, whether
Right.
it's their company brand or their personal brand. I wanted to ask you, what role does storytelling play in building a successful brand?
It is important.
Mhm.
I will never disagree with that. It the simple answer is that it creates an emotional bond with the consumer.
Mhm.
You're tapping into um, and storytelling is not necessarily written; it's visual. It's
Mm.
it's it's the method and the journey,
Mm.
and these things create an emotional bond with your consumers. This is where the brand loyalty comes from, where they actually, you hear people talk this way. They actually have this personal relationship with a brand to the point where they advocate for it and defend it. And great storytelling is about dissonance. Um, you know, the the there's some kind of conflict, a
Mm.
solution, and if you do this in the right way, from innovation right out to your marketing and advertising, it creates a very, very intriguing journey for the consumer.
Right.
Uh, but again, the method, is not just written. This is why copywriters are important. I always advocate for copywriters. Storytelling is a very valuable process to have as a company and a brand.
Well said. And PJ, what, in your view, are some of the differences in branding strategies when it comes to B2B versus B2C?
Okay, so they're essentially the same, except the targets are different.
Mm.
B2B focuses on like your decision makers. They're usually trying to solve a big, expensive problem. They're trying to invest in something for the company, and you have to tap into their needs and their objectives.
Mm.
The B2C specifically targets the end user, the consumer. The marketing is targeting to the consumer needs as individuals.
Mm.
Is it meeting the whether it's whether it's domestic uses like products for the home or the food. So the strategies are not that different, except that you change the targets.
Yeah.
So you adjust it for that. So a decision maker wants to know if they're investing millions of dollars, what's the result, they're going to get back? Is it worth it? That kind of thing. So your strategy has to target that kind of thinking from a company perspective, and B2C targets more an individual need, right? That's how I would describe it
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. No, great response. Great response. And how important is brand authenticity and transparency?
Very important,
Mhm.
especially today. We
Okay.
saw this in the pandemic.
Mm.
Uh, Brand managers or owners need to know how to respond to negative feedback, conflicts. Uh, that's the transparency, um, and or being authentic to themselves. Transparency is letting that consumer, whether it was a negative response or not, feel valuable, right? So the brand is being authentic by not changing their core beliefs and philosophies, but adapting to change and responding to any, whether it's good or bad, feedback or perception that people may have.
Mhm.
Because if you stick to what you believe in, you tend to cipher out the people that are your core followers and those are not. But
Mm.
if you change it, then you don't know. So you
Yeah.
stick to that. That's your authenticity as a brand. The
Mm.
transparency is letting those people feel valuable, that they're important to you as a brand, as a
Mm.
company.
Mm.
But we're trying to fix this problem, but you don't the when you lose those two things, transparency and authenticity, is when you either don't respond or you respond horribly, and it just adds to more pain to the problem.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Well said. Well said. A few minutes back, we were talking about some of the mistakes startups make. And you said, assuming they have a brand. My question now is, what advice would you give to startups looking to build their brand from the ground up?
Um, so we've covered business management and product development. Once you've established those effectively, then you would now start to try and align. So if you control the perception, you control context.
Mm.
So now you have to, what's the perception you'd like people to have about your company or your brand? The brand that you're going to now define. I don't like saying building, we define brands. And you align that, you have to do your research and ensure that you're aligning with the right target audience, the right consumers.
Mm.
And once those things come together, you can start now defining that brand from your logo. So I have there's two sides to it. There's the intangible and the tangible. So to get from logos to your brand positioning, you have to understand those two things I spoke about. The perception you want to have, and what are you meeting the consumer's perception as well? Are you aligned?
Mm.
And then you can start defining it properly. So I would always suggest write a philosophy, build something on a philosophy as a business,
Correct.
and write a manifesto. This is a public statement that this is who we are and what we represent. Those two things help you to define the brand process. So the startup, I would start writing that philosophy the moment I came up with the idea, possibly. And then when you define the business and all that, you write your manifesto,
Mm.
and you externalize this,
What a
right?
great response. I think you've really honed in on two specific points. Write your vision, and when you're ready, write your
Yeah,
manifesto. Thank you. Very,
yeah.
very powerful
If I
too.
may, if I may,
Yes, of
one more
course.
thing I'd add is that
Yeah.
brand is is your expertise and reputation. That's why you have to write those things.
Mm.
It's how you make those two things known or visible. Your expertise is what you're good at, and your reputation is the experience you gave to someone. They will spread that for you,
Mm.
right? So you need the manifesto and the philosophy.
Great response. Thank you. So now I'm going to ask you a few questions on the other avatar, which is the brand as a brand design director.
Mhm.
And my first question is, what are the primary responsibilities of a brand design director?
Okay, so the director is the operative word there. Brand would be the subject. I'm dyslexic, by the way. That's why I speak this way. So
Mhm.
I break things down. Um, so the brand director design is also important in that whole thing.
Mhm.
Um, they have to establish a mission objective. The military uses these things: mission, objectives, and your targets and strategies, right? The director is responsible for all of that, defining that mission based on the company's business objectives. And then they have to now guide the teams, creative teams, all these other things, whether it's administrative, business, um, or creative. They have to define that process and develop these strategies to achieve these objectives. So they're essentially leading multiple teams, but they're also trying to align business and brand, which are two different things in my book anyway. Brand management and business management are two different things, and they have to align them. So as a director, you're giving directives, but you're also allowing the teams to show their strength without micromanaging. You don't want to micromanage.
Mhm.
So a good director is a good leader. And how I break this down when I've done it is I have what I call creative, design, business, and marketing.
Mhm.
That's the process. Because a great creative process requires art, science, design, and engineering, or the engineering and design. And that's the process. You have to have the creative, which usually has horrible ideas, but you have one good idea. I would say horrible idea. What I mean is they're not really functional ideas.
Mhm.
They're great ideas, but not functional. So
Right.
design has to say, let's test this one. And if it works, then they say, all right, this is a good idea. It works. We've tested it. Let's
Mhm.
send it to business and marketing. And
Mhm.
business now will find that target, and marketing helps to leverage that value, which is leveraging any limitations you have. That's really what marketing is. So brand design director has to guide the entire process.
Mhm.
And of course, they're also the representative of both the owners and the team. So they're in the middle.
Correct. But you know,
Yeah.
the other question that I often had is that, there is always a creative vision that you were just speaking about. And then there is the overall business strategy.
Right.
How do you align a creative vision for a brand and the overall business strategy for the brand?
Hmm. Good question. Um, it's very rare for you to sell creative to anyone.
Mm,
It's like selling art to someone who doesn't understand the value of it. So the creative strategy would have to have a business objective behind it.
mm,
And what you're doing is finding a solution to a complex problem. And then you say, and this is how we would deliver this solution.
mm,
That's your creative. And you wrap it up into what I call this a nicely wrapped package. So it looks great, feels great, but it also solves a business problem. If it doesn't solve a business problem, your creative strategy is not a good strategy. It has to be aligned to a business solution for a business problem. Um, Otherwise, what you have is stylistic work, and stylistic, as beautiful as it is, and stylistic is good, but if you just have stylistic, that's surface level,
mm,
and it's not worth a lot of money. It's not worth a lot. It doesn't have a lot of value in the business world.
mm,
Um, Business has specific objectives, and the reason why the brand exists in the first place is that the company cannot speak to people.
mm.
It's Peter Drucker said it best. There's two functions in business. It's innovation and marketing. That's
Correct.
what business does. So the creative side has to align with that in order to have value. Which is why I think every company should have an R&D department. So that's where innovation comes from.
Mm,
So creative, based on definition, is how a company defines that process. That's your strategy. Um, yeah, that's my
mm.
simplified response,
Yeah,
hopefully.
well said. So I have time for two more questions.
No problem.
What is your strategy for maintaining design quality and consistency across multiple brand touchpoints?
Okay, so we have this is now stakeholders, and we have to align stakeholders. We have to understand the vision that
Mm,
we're that oh that well the overall vision that's set, and we have to define what those objectives are. We have what we call strategists and tacticians. So the marketing dictates the strategy, and creative teams, sales teams, everybody develops their strategies to achieve the objectives that achieve this overall mission. And you have to get everyone vested in that internally and anyone that's partnering with you externally. They all need to be aligned on that objective, understand the vision, and you now always keep focus on the process, and you keep so um that would allow consistency across all areas,
mhm,
because they all know what they're trying to do in
mm,
their own way. They're doing it, but it has to meet at one point, and everybody has to be kind of like, no matter what they do, it should be consistent with what the creative team is doing, the business
mm,
team is doing. And I learned this in art school, actually, when I did fine art. And it's taking one idea across different disciplines,
mm,
painting, photography, it's the same idea delivered in a different way. And
mm,
that's how I still use that to this day. I have to get these things to understand what we're trying to achieve
mm,
so that it's always consistent. And then you have your brand guidelines. This is an important document. It allows you, which Red Bull is very good at. They have a very good guideline, and they have a DAMS, digital asset management system. So these things allow people to always have the assets available to them.
mm,
So even if they don't understand everything, they whatever they use, you have controlled that consistency with the assets.
mm,
I could share it with a short little story. So when the U.S. military was trying to find, I think it was Saddam Hussein and all his generals,
mhm,
these are jarheads, right? They're not necessarily strategists. The sort of the army, these army guys, they play cards a lot. And what they did was printed, so it's 52 in a deck, I think. So they printed the images of all these people on
wow,
these cards.
mhm,
So when they played the game, they didn't have to know their name. They didn't have to know who they are. They just know that these are the targets. And that's why if you watch movies, you hear them say, "We got the King of Spades," or "We got this," because they associate the card, because soldiers keep their cards, but the
yeah,
game never ends, right? So they associated the cards with the faces. So whenever they went to the mission, they say, "Oh, we got the King of Spades," and that for me is a great example of the consistency and everything
yeah,
across different teams, communication, right?
mm,
If that helps.
amazing. No, no, this is such an amazing story, and thank you for sharing it. I wasn't aware of this, but what a fabulous way to be able to remember and associate,
Right.
with the brand. Thank you. My last question for you, PJ. Given all your experience as a designer, as a branding guru, as a design director, can you talk about a project where you had to make some critical design decisions and the impact it had? And I don't want names of any companies, of course.
Yeah. Um, there's several, but over 20 plus years, there's two stand out to me, but I think the smaller one, I think, is the most valuable
Mhm,
lesson for me. It was a packaging for baby cereal, infant cereal.
mhm,
Um, I arrived at the agency first month on the job. They knew my background, and they offered me this big project for this massive manufacturing company. And I was looking at all these cereals on the shelves and that's already out there. And so the agency director and I, we were discussing it, and he said it needs to be very yummy, right? Tasty. I'm like, I'm looking at all these cereals. None of them are tasty. They're very formulated, looking
Yeah.
like medical products from a lab, right? And I went back to my basic roots of art, and I the entire team was looking at me strangely because they all jump on the computer and start designing. I was drawing. I got sheets of paper and I was drawing and I printed them out, or I mean, I wrapped it around this can we had, and I looked at it and do the whole view, 360 view, and seeing from every angle how would this behave and how would this feel like to look to a mother. Um, and then once I got this idea defined, I had to now go and digitize it on the computer, and we printed it out, got the actual can, and well, it wasn't really a can, it was a plastic container, and we did the same thing, wrapped it around, test after test. And the director was like, "It's not yummy. It's not tasty. It's not, when you eat this, this is how he's talking to me." I'm like, I don't understand this line of questions. And then it hit me like, again, this is where the brand thing came in. It's like, yeah, if I saw this as a mother, would I buy this for my child? And then you started getting into the technicalities, understanding business objectives, understanding the product experience. What is your intended experience is what I arrived at, concluded. That's the question I ask to this day in everything I do. What is the intended experience here?
Correct.
Once you answer the question, the process becomes a different thing. And that project taught me a lot about the technicalities of, thankfully I worked in printing, so I've had the experience in different industries that helped. So I was designing for also keeping their printing manufacturing cost effectively efficient. And yeah, so as a creative professional, and at that time I was hired as a graphic designer, this is years ago, you realize the importance of the business side of things, and it changed everything for me from that day. Yeah.
I can imagine. What an amazing example. And thank you. But on that note, PJ, just want to say thank you so much for talking to me about your own journey. Thank you for speaking to me about branding. I think we covered a lot of ground on different aspects of branding, and, some of the examples that you gave, some of the stories that you shared in branding as a brand design director, about the army, and what you just told me about the milk or cereal. Quite an amazing set of amazing experiences you had. I'm sure there's a book lying inside you somewhere, where someday we will see a book by Philip J. Clayton
I
on branding
appreciate
and
it.
brand design. But thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.